The gala in Beacon Hill was a parade of diamonds and pretenses, but the real cracks showed on the silent ride home. When Elena rolled her eyes at Jack's rough, worker hands and told him to move his things to the couch because she couldn't stand the heat coming off him, she didn't realize she had just handed him the demolition order for their entire life. Jack didn't just move his pillow, he moved the foundation. If the quiet, methodical dismantling of a betrayal intrigues you, stay with me, because the silence is about to get deafening. The silence inside the Uber Black was heavier than the wet snow piling up on the streets of Boston. Outside, the city was a blur of charcoal and slush, the gas lamps of Beacon Hill flickering as the car navigated the narrow, cobblestone incline of Mount Vernon Street. Jack sat with his hands clasped on his knees. His knuckles were swollen, the skin permanently roughened by years of handling timber and stone, a stark contrast to the sleek, black fabric of the tuxedo Elena had insisted he wear. He felt like a prop, a rugged accessory she had brought along to the Tech Innovators Gala to prove she had a grounded life, only to discard him the moment he opened his mouth. Elena sat pressed against the opposite door, the blue light of her iPhone illuminating her face. She was typing furiously, her thumb striking the screen with a rhythm that sounded like agitated raindrops. She hadn't looked at him since they left the venue. "Who are you texting at 1 a.m? Jack asked, his voice gravelly. He tried to keep the accusation out of it, aiming for simple curiosity. Elena didn't look up. "Work, Jack. Crisis control. You wouldn't understand the optics." Optics. That was her favorite word lately. Everything was about how things looked, not how they were built. The car pulled up to the curb in front of the 4-story brownstone. It was a masterpiece of 19th-century architecture that Jack had spent the last 5 years restoring with his own hands. He knew every shim behind the wainscoting, every hidden nail in the crown molding. He had bled for this house, literally, stripping away decades of rot to give Elena the palace she claimed she always wanted. They exited the car into the biting wind. Jack moved to take her arm to steady her on the icy bricks, but she pulled away sharply, clutching her faux fur wrapped tighter around her shoulders. "I can walk," she snapped. Jack let his hand drop. He followed her up the granite steps, the cold seeping through the thin soles of his dress shoes. Inside, the foyer was warm, smelling of the expensive sandalwood diffuser Elena kept on the console table. She kicked off her heels immediately, leaving them scattered on the herringbone oak floor, the floor Jack had laid, piece by piece, over a grueling Thanksgiving weekend 3 years ago. She stormed past him toward the kitchen, her silk gown rustling like dry leaves. Jack picked up the shoes. He aligned them neatly by the wall. "Old habits. You didn't have to tell the CEO of Oryx about the drywall sourcing." Elena's voice floated out from the kitchen, sharp and echoing. Jack walked in to find her pouring a glass of water, her back to him. He asked about the renovation. Jack said, loosening his bow tie. It felt like a noose. He asked what the hardest part of the project was. I told him. "You made it sound dirty." She spun around, the glass trembling in her manicured hand. "Talking about dust and labor unions and sweat. These are investors, Jack. They deal in futures, in clouds, in polished products. They don't want to hear about the grime." "The grime is what holds the roof up, L," Jack said quietly. He leaned against the marble island. Carrara, imported, 2,000 pounds, hoisted in by a crane he had operated. "Don't call me L." "Not tonight," she said, her eyes flashing with a mix of exhaustion and disdain. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second, Jack saw the girl from Southie he had fallen in love with. But then the mask slipped back on. She looked at his hands, resting on the white marble. There was a faint trace of a healing cut on his thumb. She grimaced. "I'm going to bed," she announced, brushing past him. Jack waited a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, before following her up the stairs. The house felt massive tonight. Hollow. In the master bedroom, the lights were dimmed. Elena was already at her vanity, scrubbing the makeup off her face with aggressive swipes. Jack sat on the edge of the king-sized bed. He ran his hand along the walnut bed frame. He had built this, too. He had milled the wood himself, sanded it until it was as smooth as glass. joined it without screws using Japanese joinery techniques because he wanted their marriage bed to be perfect, unbreakable. I think we need to take a trip, Jack said softly to her reflection in the mirror. Just us. No phones. Go up to the cabin in Maine. Remember how we used to? I'm going to the Hamptons on Tuesday, she cut him off. Ideally alone. Or with people who can help my career. The rejection hung in the air, toxic and thick. Jack looked at the back of her neck, exposed as she pinned her hair up. Christian is going to be there, isn't he? Jack asked. The name tasted like bile. Christian Vance. The venture capitalist who had been mentoring her. Elena stopped moving. She stared at herself in the mirror, her expression unreadable. Then, she turned slowly. There was no guilt in her eyes. Only annoyance. You are so insecure, she spat. It's pathetic. Christian is a business partner. He understands my world. You're still mentally stuck in a zip code we left 10 years ago. I built this world for you, Elena, Jack said, his voice rising slightly. Every beam in this house. I built it. And that's all you are, Jack, she said, standing up and walking toward the bed. She looked at him with a chilling indifference. You're the builder. You're the help. But I've outgrown the renovation. She pulled the duvet cover back. Egyptian cotton. Cool and crisp. She pointed a finger at the door. I have a migraine. And honestly, I can't stand the smell of sawdust and insecurity tonight. It's suffocating. This is my bed, Jack said, gripping the mattress. It's my house, she countered, though her name wasn't the only one on the deed. I need sleep. Real sleep. Not you tossing and turning and trying to touch me with those rough hands. She climbed into the bed, turning her back to him immediately, pulling the covers up to her shoulder. Move your things to the couch in the study, she said into her pillow. Close the door on your way out. Jack sat frozen. The humiliation wasn't hot, it was ice cold. It started in his chest and spread to his limbs. He looked at the woman he had worshipped for half his life. He looked at the bed frame he had crafted with love, now a fortress barring him entry. He realized then that he wasn't her husband anymore. He was just another lingering artifact from her past she hadn't gotten around to throwing out yet. Move your things to the couch. Jack stood up slowly. The floorboards didn't creak. He had installed them too well. All right, Jack whispered. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He walked over to the dresser, picked up his watch and his wallet. He looked at her one last time, a lump under the white sheets, breathing evenly, already forgetting he was there. He walked out of the master suite and closed the door. The latch clicked, a sound of finality. Jack walked down the hallway to the study. But he didn't lie down on the leather sofa. He stood by the window, looking out at the snowy street. He saw his reflection in the glass, a man in a tuxedo with worker's hands. She wanted him to move his things. He looked around the room. The built-in bookshelves he had installed. The desk he had refinished. A dark, calm resolve settled over him. If she wanted him out of the bedroom, fine. But he wasn't just going to move to the couch. He pulled out his phone. 1:15 a.m. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his foreman, Sal. He didn't call, not yet. But he stared at the number. He wasn't going to sleep. He was going to plan. The Chesterfield leather sofa in the study was beautiful to look at. Jack had picked out the rich, cognac hide himself, but it was hell to sleep on. The buttons dug into his ribs, and the leather remained stubbornly cold against his skin, refusing to absorb any body heat. Jack woke before the sun. The digital clock on the mahogany desk read 5:15 a.m. His back seized up as he sat, a sharp reminder of the night spent in exile. The house was dead silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the HVAC system. He listened to the airflow, noting a slight rattle in the ductwork near the ceiling. He would have fixed it yesterday. Today he just let it rattle. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked out into the hallway. The house was bathed in the milky, gray light of a Boston winter dawn. It felt less like a home and more like a museum he had broken into. He walked to the kitchen, his bare feet silent on the oak floorboards. He needed coffee. Strong, black, and hot. As he waited for the French press to steep, his eyes wandered to the mudroom area by the back door. Elena's gym bag was sitting on the bench. It was a sleek, designer thing, neoprene, and rose gold zippers. She had a Pilates class at 7 a.m., a ritual she never missed. Jack took a sip of the coffee. It scalded his tongue, waking him up fully. He stared at the bag. Usually, he respected her privacy implicitly. He was a man who believed in boundaries. But the memory of her voice last night, "Move your things to the couch," gnawed at him. It wasn't just anger, it was the dismissal. As if he were an employee who had overstepped. He set the mug down on the island. He walked over to the bench. He didn't unzip the main compartment. He knew that would just be yoga pants and a towel. He reached for the small, velvet-lined side pocket, the one intended for jewelry or keys. His fingers brushed against cold metal. It wasn't her primary iPhone. That was upstairs on the nightstand, charging next to her head. This was an older model, a cracked iPhone 8 that he thought she had recycled years ago. It was dead silent, but when he pressed the home button, the screen lit up. 12% battery. There was no passcode. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs, a slow, heavy thudding that drowned out the rattling vent. He opened the Messages app. There was only one conversation thread. The name saved was C. He scrolled to the bottom. The timestamps were from last night, while he was sitting in the car, and later, while he was staring at the ceiling of the study. C. Did the brute finally leave you alone? 1:34 a.m. Elena. He's exiled to the study. Finally. God. I feel like I've been suffocated all night. I need air. I need you. 1:36 a.m. C. Only 3 more days until the Hamptons. I have the suite booked. The one with the ocean view. No sawdust, no noise. Just us. 1:38 a.m. Elena. I can't wait to feel human again. His hands, they're so rough, Christian. When he touches me, it feels like sandpaper. I just want to scrub my skin. 1:40 a.m. C. I'll smooth it over. Sleep tight. L. 1:42 a.m. Jack read the line about his hands 3 times. He looked down at his own hand holding the phone. The calluses on his palm, the scar on his index finger from a table saw accident 5 years ago, the permanent stain of walnut oil in the creases. These hands had built the frame of the bed she was currently sleeping in. These hands had paid for the bag this phone was hidden in. Sandpaper. A coldness settled over him, absolute and terrifying. It wasn't the hot flush of jealousy. It was the detached assessment of a structural engineer looking at a load-bearing wall that had snapped. The integrity of the structure was gone. The house was condemned. He didn't throw the phone. He didn't scream. He pulled his own phone from his pajama pocket and snapped high-resolution photos of the screen, scrolling up to capture months of dates, times, and mockery. He wiped the screen of the burner phone on his t-shirt to remove his fingerprints. He placed it back into the velvet pocket, zipping it exactly halfway, just as he had found it. He walked back to the kitchen and poured the rest of his coffee down the sink. He rinsed the mug and placed it in the dishwasher. Above him, he heard the floorboards creak in the master bedroom. She was awake. Jack moved quickly. He went back to the study, folded the blanket he hadn't used, and sat at the desk. He pulled out a legal pad and a pen. When Elena walked down the stairs 20 minutes later, dressed in her Lululemon gear, she looked fresh, rested, and completely unbothered. She saw Jack sitting in the study, sketching something on the pad. "I'm going to Pilates," she called out, not even pausing to look at him. "Then I'm going straight to the office to prep for the trip. Don't wait up." "I won't," Jack said. He didn't look up from the paper. She grabbed the gym bag, the bag carrying the evidence of her betrayal, and breezed out the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut. Jack looked down at the legal pad. He wasn't sketching a renovation plan. He was making a list. Item 1, call Sal. Need the truck. Item 2, call the bank. Item 3, storage. He looked at his hands again. They were steady. Rough, yes, but steady enough to tear this whole life down, brick by brick. Tuesday morning arrived with a biting chill that rattled the window panes of the brownstone. In the master bedroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive hair products and the chaotic energy of departure. Jack leaned against the doorframe, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching Elena pack. She wasn't just throwing things into a bag. She was curating a persona. The open Louis Vuitton suitcase on the bed, his bed, was being filled with items that had nothing to do with a corporate wellness retreat. He saw the sheer silk lingerie tucked beneath a heavy wool sweater. He saw the perfume she only wore for special occasions, the one that cost $300 an ounce. He saw the new jewelry he hadn't bought her. "Do you think this coat is too much?" Elena asked, holding up a cashmere trench. She didn't turn to look at him. She was addressing her reflection in the full-length mirror. "The itinerary says we have a nature walk, but I don't want to look like a lumberjack." Jack took a sip of black coffee. The irony tasted bitter. "It looks fine, Elena. It's the Hamptons in winter. You'll fit right in." "I hope so," she sighed, folding the coat and placing it delicately over the lingerie. "This retreat is going to be intense. Meditation, digital detox, networking. I probably won't have signal for days." "Right," Jack said, his voice flat. Digital detox. He knew exactly where she was going. He had looked up the resort Christian had mentioned in the texts. It wasn't a wellness center. It was a boutique hotel known for its discretion and its room service champagne. Elena zipped the suitcase shut with a sharp hiss. She smoothed her hair, checked her watch, and finally turned to face him. She looked perfect, polished, distant, and completely out of his league. She looked at him standing there in his flannel shirt and Carhartt work pants, and her nose wrinkled slightly, a reflex she probably didn't even notice anymore. "Okay, I'm off," she said, grabbing her purse. She walked past him, stopping just short of the doorway. She didn't lean in for a kiss. She didn't touch his arm. Instead, she pulled a small sticky note from her pocket and slapped it onto the doorframe next to his shoulder. "While I'm gone," she said, her tone shifting into what Jack called her manager voice. "Can you finally look at the window in the guest room? It's been whistling for weeks. It's driving me insane." Jack looked at the yellow square of paper. "Guest room window. And the dimmer switch in the dining room buzzes," she added, checking her phone. "If you have time between whatever it is you do all day, just get it done, Jack. I want to come home to a house that works." Jack looked down at her. "You want a house that works?" "Yes," she said, impatient now. "I pay the mortgage too, remember? I shouldn't have to live in a construction zone." "Don't worry," Jack said. He looked her right in the eyes. For a second, he thought she might see the hollowness in his gaze, the utter lack of affection. "I'm going to take care of everything. By the time you get back, you won't hear a single rattle." "Good," she said, dismissing him. "My Uber is here." She hoisted the heavy suitcase herself, refusing to ask for his help, or perhaps not wanting his rough hands touching her luxury leather handles. She marched down the stairs, her heels clicking on the wood like a countdown. Jack didn't follow her down. He walked to the window of the master bedroom and looked down at the street. He watched as the black SUV pulled up. The driver got out and took her bag. Elena didn't look back at the house. She didn't look up at the window where her husband of 10 years stood watching. She slid into the back seat, already typing on her phone, likely texting Christian that the brute was finally in the rearview mirror. The car pulled away, disappearing around the corner of Mount Vernon Street, swallowed by the gray morning. Jack stood there for a long time. The house was suddenly deafeningly quiet. The whistling of the drafty window in the guest room drifted down the hall, a high, thin sound. She wanted him to fix the window. She wanted him to fix the switch. She wanted him to be the maintenance staff in her life, keeping the structure standing while she lived her real life elsewhere. Jack finished his coffee in one long swallow. He set the mug down on the windowsill. "I'll fix it, Elena," he whispered to the empty room. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't text her. He dialed the number he had stared at yesterday. "Sal," Jack said when the line clicked open. His voice was steady, the voice of a foreman running a job site. "Yeah, it's me. Tell the boys to bring the truck. The big one. We're starting now." He hung up and looked around the bedroom. The bed, the vanity, the curtains, the rug. He wasn't going to repair the window. He was going to remove the reason she had a view. 30 minutes later, the silence of Mount Vernon Street was broken by the heavy, rhythmic idle of a diesel engine. It wasn't the polite purr of the luxury SUVs that usually lined the curb. It was the guttural growl of a Ford F-550 box truck, painted a matte gray, with Callahan Construction stenciled on the door in chipped white paint. Jack watched from the bay window as the truck double-parked, blocking the narrow lane. A Prius behind it honked indignantly, but the driver of the truck didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. Sal climbed out of the cab. He was a fireplug of a man, 50 years old with forearms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He slammed the truck door and looked up at the house. He didn't look impressed by the multi-million-dollar brownstone. He looked concerned. Jack opened the front door before Sal could ring the bell. The cold air rushed in, mixing with the scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to Sal's jacket. "Boss," Sal nodded, wiping his boots on the mat out of habit. He looked past Jack into the foyer, eyeing the herringbone floors and the crystal chandelier. "You said a loadout. I didn't think you meant here." "I did," Jack said, stepping aside to let him in. Behind Sal, 3 other men, Danny, Mike, and a new kid Jack didn't know, were hopping off the back of the truck, carrying moving blankets and dollies. Sal stepped into the foyer. He looked uncomfortable, like a bull in a china shop. He took off his beanie, twisting it in his hands. "Jack, this is your house. You and the missus." "Not anymore," Jack said. The words came out easier than he expected. "She's in the Hamptons. She wants space. I'm giving it to her." Sal looked at Jack's face. He had known Jack since Jack was an apprentice mixing mortar. He saw the dark circles under his eyes, the set of his jaw. He didn't ask about the marriage. In their world, you didn't ask. You just showed up. "What's the scope?" Sal asked, his voice shifting to business. "Everything," Jack said. He walked into the living room, his boots heavy on the floor. "If it's not bolted to the structural framing, it goes. Furniture, rugs, curtains, artwork, dishes." "The built-ins?" Sal asked, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves Jack had installed 2 years ago. "Leave the millwork," Jack said, running a hand over the smooth wood. "I'm not destroying the house, Sal. I'm resetting it. I want it back to the bones. The way it was before the decoration." The crew filed in, looking around with wide eyes. Danny whistled low as he saw the massive flat-screen TV and the Italian sofas. "Yo, Jack, this stuff is worth more than my car," Danny said. "Careful with it," Jack warned. "We aren't throwing it away. We're storing it. Pack it like you're packing a museum. Not a scratch." "Where's it going?" Sal asked. "Storage yard down in the seaport. Container B4. I rented it this morning." Sal nodded. He turned to the crew and clapped his hands, the sharp sound echoing through the quiet house. "All right, you heard the man. Pads on the door frames. Runners on the floors. I don't want a single mark on the woodwork. Start in the living room and work your way up." The energy in the house shifted instantly. It ceased to be a home and became a job site. The quiet intimacy of the morning was shattered by the sound of gaffer tape ripping, the squeak of dolly wheels, and the grunt of men lifting heavy weight. Jack stood in the center of the living room, directing traffic. "Take the couch first," Jack said, pointing to the leather sofa in the study, the place of his exile. "Get that thing out of here." Mike and the new kid hoisted the heavy leather piece. As they maneuvered it through the doorway, Jack felt a strange lightness in his chest. That couch was where she had told him to sleep. It was the symbol of his demotion. Now, it was just a piece of furniture on a hand truck, heading for a cold steel box. "Kitchen next," Jack ordered, moving to the culinary sanctuary Elena loved to show off, but rarely used. Every appliance that isn't hardwired. The espresso machine, the stand mixer, the wine fridge contents. As the men worked, the house began to echo. Without the rugs to dampen the sound, the footsteps became louder. The walls, stripped of the abstract art Elena favored, looked vast and pale. Sal walked up to Jack, holding a framed photo he had taken off the mantelpiece. It was a picture of Jack and Elena from 5 years ago, standing on the scaffolding of this very house, smiling, covered in dust. "This too?" Sal asked quietly. Jack looked at the photo. He remembered that day. They had eaten pizza on the floor of the unfinished master bedroom. She had told him he was her hero. "Especially that," Jack said. Sal nodded and placed it face down in a packing crate. "Keep it moving," Jack said, his voice hard. "I want the first floor clear by noon. We hit the master bedroom after lunch." He turned away, walking toward the window to watch them load the first items into the truck. The neighbors were starting to watch from their windows. peering through their lace curtains at the spectacle. Let them look. The polished facade of 42 Mount Vernon Street was coming down, and for the first time in months, Jack felt like he was the one holding the sledgehammer. By 1 p.m., the ground floor of the brownstone was a hollow shell. The living room echoed with the footsteps of the crew, the sound bouncing off the bare walls where the acoustic dampening of rugs and curtains used to be. The kitchen was stripped of every appliance that wasn't hard-piped into the wall. The marble counters were bare, cold, and gleaming under the recessed lighting. Upstairs, Jack commanded. He didn't raise his voice, but the word carried a weight that made the crew pause. Sal wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. He looked up the floating staircase. Jack, usually we don't touch the bedrooms unless the homeowners are, well, present. Liability and all that. Jewelry, personal items. I am the homeowner, Sal, Jack said, starting up the stairs. And I'm present. Bring the wardrobe boxes. The master suite was bathed in the afternoon sun, the light filtering through the sheer curtains that were about to be ripped down. The room smelled faintly of lavender and the expensive, crisp scent of the dry cleaners, the smell of Elena. The crew hesitated in the doorway. To walk into another man's bedroom felt like a transgression. The mattress, Jack said, pointing to the bed. Wrap it in plastic. Take it. The box spring too. And the frame? Mike asked, admiring the walnut joinery. That's a custom piece, boss. Must weigh 400 pounds. The frame stays, Jack said. He ran his hand over the footboard. He remembered the week he spent sanding this wood, the dust coating his eyelashes, imagining how he and Elena would grow old in this bed. It's part of the house. The mattress. That's just where we slept. Get rid of it. As the men heaved the thick mattress off the frame, revealing the wooden slats underneath like a ribcage exposed, Jack turned to the double doors of the walk-in closet. This was the hardest part. This was the temple he had built for her. He opened the doors. The automatic lights flickered on, illuminating rows of color-coordinated designer clothes, shelves of handbags, and a shoe wall that rivaled a department store display. It was a shrine to the woman she had become, the vice president, the socialite, the woman who needed to look perfect to hide the rot underneath. Jack grabbed a wardrobe box and snapped it into shape. He walked to the section of evening gowns. He didn't fold them. He grabbed the hangers in bunches, the metal clinking together, and transferred them directly into the cardboard box. Silk, velvet, chiffon. He felt the fabric slide through his rough fingers. He reached the back of the closet, the section where she kept her seasonal items. He pulled out a drawer he had built specifically for her lingerie. He stopped. Lying on top of the silk organizers was a set of black lace lingerie. Tag still on. La Perla. He looked at the size. It was her size, but he had never seen it. She wore old t-shirts to bed with him, or pragmatic cotton pajamas. This was for the Hamptons. This was for the wellness retreat. He didn't feel the sting of tears. He felt a dry, scorching heat in his chest. He scooped the lingerie up, hundreds of dollars of lace, and dropped it into the bottom of a box. He didn't treat it with care. He treated it like insulation foam or drywall scraps. Yo, Jack, Sal called from the bedroom. Jack walked out. Sal was standing by the nightstand, Elena's side. He was holding a small velvet tray that usually sat next to her lamp. We pack this? Sal asked. It's jewelry. Looks expensive. Jack looked down at the tray. There were her diamond stud earrings, her platinum tennis bracelet, and her engagement ring. She had left her engagement ring. Jack picked it up. It was a vintage setting, 1920s, that he had spent 6 months saving for when he was just a junior contractor. He remembered her crying when he put it on her finger. She had said she would never take it off. She hadn't taken it to the Hamptons. She didn't want to look married for Christian. She wanted to be clean. Pack it, Jack said, dropping the ring back onto the velvet tray with a dull clatter. Put it in the small safe box. Mark it valuables. It goes to storage with the rest. You sure, boss? Sal asked, his voice low. Once this stuff leaves the house. She told me to move her things, Sal, Jack said, looking at the empty wooden slats of the bed frame. I'm just following instructions. He turned back to the closet. Faster, guys. I want this room empty by 3. I don't want a single bobby pin left on the floor. The sound of the tape guns ripped through the air again, louder this time, sealing the boxes. One by one, the shells were cleared. The shoes were boxed. The perfumes were wrapped in bubble wrap. 30 minutes later, the closet was just a small, white room with empty wooden shelves. The clothes were gone. The smell of her was fading, replaced by the smell of cardboard and sweat. Jack stood in the center of the master bedroom. The mattress was gone. The nightstands were empty. The curtains were down, leaving the windows bare and exposing the room to the cold gaze of the city. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. It was just a space defined by four walls. Dining room next, Jack said, walking out without looking back. Jack left Sal in charge of the loading dock, formerly known as the front entrance, and drove his pickup truck downtown. The financial district was only a few miles away, but it felt like a different planet compared to the sawdust-filled atmosphere of the brownstone. He parked in a garage on Federal Street and walked toward the towering glass structure that housed their private bank. He was still wearing his work clothes, heavy boots, canvas pants stained with drywall dust, and a flannel shirt. He didn't care. In the past, Elena would have been mortified if he walked into this building looking like this. She always insisted he clean up before meeting with their wealth manager. Today, Jack walked through the revolving doors with his head high. The security guard gave him a second glance, but didn't stop him. Money didn't have a dress code, and Jack had plenty of it. He sat in the plush waiting area outside Mr. Henderson's office. The silence here was different than the silence in his house. It was pressurized, heavy with the weight of unseen transactions. Mr. Callahan? Robert Henderson, a man in a bespoke Navy suit who had managed their accounts for 7 years, stood at the door. He looked slightly confused by Jack's appearance, but masked it with a professional smile. We weren't expecting you today. Is everything all right? I need to make some changes to the accounts, Robert, Jack said, standing up. He didn't offer a hand to shake. His hands were dirty from the morning's work. Inside the office, Jack sat in the leather chair, softer than the one in his study, and got straight to the point. I want to close the joint checking and the joint savings. Today. Robert blinked, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Close them? Jack, those are the primary operating accounts for the household. The mortgage, the utilities, the credit cards are linked to those. I know, Jack said. I want to withdraw the full balance in a cashier's check made out to me. And I want to freeze the linked credit cards immediately. Robert cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Does Elena know about this? Usually, for a total liquidation, we prefer both parties to be. It's in or account, Robert. Not in an account. I can sign for it unilaterally. You told me that when we opened it. Technically, yes, Robert conceded. He typed something, his brow furrowing. But Jack, the American Express Platinum. There's a pending charge authorization from the Hampton Surf and Sand Resort. If I freeze the card now, the final charge might be declined upon checkout. Jack leaned forward. That's the point. He watched the banker work. For years, the dynamic had been simple. Elena was the executive, the one with the fancy title and the stock options. But Jack was the one with the cash flow. His contracting business was lucrative, steady, and liquid. He put 90% of his draw into the joint account to pay for the house, the cars, the galas, the vacations. Elena invested her salary in her own separate portfolio, claiming she was building their retirement. In reality, Jack had been funding her lifestyle while she saved for a future he wasn't going to be part of. She has her own personal accounts here, doesn't she? Jack asked. I can't discuss her separate accounts with you, Jack. You know that, Robert said quietly. I don't need details. Just tell me she has access to money. She has accounts, Robert said carefully. But transfers take time. Clearance takes days. If you cut the joint line, she will be illiquid for a short period. Do it, Jack said. The printer whirred in the corner. It was a soft, rhythmic sound. Robert slid a piece of paper across the desk. A withdrawal slip for the remaining balance. It was a significant number. Enough to buy a small house in the suburbs outright. Jack signed his name. The ink flowed smoothly. And the cards? Jack asked. Cancelled. Effective immediately. The cards in her wallet are now just plastic. Jack took the cashier's check and folded it into his pocket. He stood up. Thank you, Robert. Jack, Robert said, standing up as well. I hope this isn't something you'll regret. Reopening these accounts, rebuilding the credit history. It's messy. It's already messy, Jack said. I'm just cleaning it up. He walked out of the office, back through the silent lobby, and out into the cold Boston afternoon. He checked his phone. 2:45 p.m. Elena was probably at the spa right now, or ordering a bottle of champagne for the room she was sharing with Christian. When she went to pay for that massage, or that dinner, she was going to slide that heavy metal card across the counter. And for the first time in 10 years, the machine was going to say declined. She would have to use her own money. She would have to explain to Christian why her card didn't work. The embarrassment would be small, momentary. She had funds, eventually, but it was a signal. The ride was over. Jack got back into his truck. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt lighter. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life. Back to the house, he muttered. Let's finish the job. The convoy left Beacon Hill just as the streetlights were flickering on, casting long, amber shadows against the snow. Jack led the way in his pickup truck, followed by the lumbering F-550 box truck and a smaller cargo van. They wound their way out of the cobblestoned elegance of the historic district, down onto the highway, and toward the industrial edges of South Boston. This was the part of the city Elena pretended didn't exist anymore. It was a landscape of chain-link fences, corrugated metal warehouses, and cracked asphalt that smelled of diesel and sea salt. It was only 3 miles from their brownstone, but it might as well have been a different continent. Jack pulled into the lot of Harbor Point Secure Storage. It wasn't a boutique facility with climate-controlled wine cellars. It was a sprawling grid of outdoor units, rows of orange metal doors facing the biting wind coming off the harbor. He parked and walked to Unit B4. The wind whipped at his flannel shirt, carrying the grit of the shipyard. He unlocked the heavy slide bolt and threw the rolling door up. It crashed open with a deafening metallic rattle, revealing a dark, cavernous space with a concrete floor that held the damp chill of the earth. Back it in. Jack signaled to Sal. The box truck beeped incessantly as it reversed toward the opening. The hydraulic lift gate whined as it lowered, hitting the asphalt with a clang. Start with the back of the truck, Jack ordered. That's the bedroom furniture. Stack it high. We need to fit it all. For the next 2 hours, Jack watched a surreal deconstruction of his wife's image. He watched Mike wheel the custom tufted velvet armchair, the one Elena liked to sit in while drinking her morning tea, down the ramp. The velvet caught the harsh glare of the facility's floodlights. It looked absurd here, like a ballerina standing in a landfill. Mike shoved it into the back corner of the concrete unit. Next came the wardrobe boxes. Dozens of them. Gowns, coats, shoes. Summer, winter. Jack stood by the door, clipboard in hand, checking things off. Careful with that mirror, Jack warned as Danny struggled with the massive, gilt-framed floor mirror from the dressing room. Danny grunted, maneuvering the heavy object. He leaned it against the corrugated metal wall. For a moment, the mirror reflected the gritty asphalt lot and the exhaust coming from the truck. It was a view Elena would have despised. That's the last of the clothes, boss, Sal said, dropping a box marked handbags onto a stack of plastic totes. What about these? Sal pointed to a collection of decorative items. Crystal vases, abstract sculptures, the expensive candle holders. Fill the gaps, Jack said. Doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to fit. The unit filled up quickly. It was a Tetris game of luxury. The mattress was shoved vertically against the wall, wrapped in thick plastic that crinkled in the cold. The dining chairs were stacked upside down on top of the mahogany table. The life they had curated, the aesthetic Elena had worked so hard to project to her friends and colleagues, was now just a dense, dark pile of stuff. Without the lighting, without the staging, without the context of the brownstone, the objects looked meaningless. They were just wood, fabric, and glass. That's it, Sal said, tossing the last moving blanket onto the truck. He looked into the unit. Grim setup, Jack. You sure she's going to be able to find anything in there? She's smart, Jack said, looking at the wall of cardboard boxes. She'll figure it out. He walked to the threshold of the unit. He looked at the label on the nearest box, Elena's Vanity. Inside were her lotions, her serums, the things she used to make herself smell like a stranger. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy-duty padlock. It was a master lock, weather-resistant, solid steel. He grabbed the strap of the rolling door and pulled it down. The sound was final, a screech of metal on metal that slammed into the concrete with a heavy thud, sealing the contents inside. The darkness swallowed the velvet and the silk. Jack slid the bolt across and threaded the padlock through the hasp. He snapped it shut. Click. He tugged on it once to make sure it held. It was solid. Here, Jack said, handing Sal a thick envelope of cash. Overtime for the boys. Tell them to keep their mouths shut. You know they will, Sal said, pocketing the money. What now, boss? You going back to that empty house? Yeah, Jack said, looking at the orange metal door one last time. It looked like every other door in the row. Anonymous. I've got a little more work to do before I can sleep. The crew loaded back into the truck. Jack got into his pickup. As he drove away, leaving Unit B4 behind in the freezing darkness of the shipyard, he felt a strange sense of peace. She had told him to move her things. He had moved them. Now, she was just a number on a rental agreement. The brownstone was quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a library, but the hollow, booming silence of a cave. Jack walked through the ground floor one last time. His heavy boots echoed sharply on the herringbone oak floors. Without the rugs, the furniture, and the art to absorb the sound, the house seemed to have grown in size. It felt vast, cold, and indifferent. He carried his toolbox in his left hand. He walked into the dining room. He flipped the light switch. The dimmer didn't buzz. He had replaced the faulty transformer 20 minutes ago. He walked into the guest room, the room she had complained about just this morning. He set his toolbox down and walked to the window. He inspected the sash. It was a minor alignment issue, the result of the wood settling over the winter. A 10-minute fix for anyone who knew what they were doing. Jack pulled out a shim and his cordless drill. He worked methodically in the fading light. He realigned the strike plate, tightened the sash lock, and ran a bead of clear silicone along the edge where the draft had been whistling. He closed the window. He listened. Silence. Fixed, Jack said to no one. He picked up his tools and walked up the stairs to the master bedroom. The room was unrecognizable. It was a white box with a walnut floor. The only thing remaining was the bed frame he had built, the skeleton of their marriage, stripped of its mattress, its sheets, its warmth. It looked like an exhibit in a gallery dedicated to loss. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, white envelope. Inside was the brass key to the master lock he had snapped shut on Unit B4. He knelt down in the exact center of the room. He placed the envelope on the floor. It was the only object in the entire room, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood. He took a pen from his pocket and wrote on the front of the envelope. He didn't write a letter. He didn't explain his feelings. He didn't scream about Christian or the betrayal. She knew what she did. He wrote 3 words. You wanted space. He stood up. He looked at the bed frame one last time. He looked at the spot where he used to wake up on Sundays and think he was the luckiest man in Boston. He didn't feel that luck now, but he didn't feel the crushing weight of the morning either. He felt clean. He walked out of the bedroom, leaving the door wide open. He walked down the stairs, his hand sliding along the banister he had hand-sanded. He reached the foyer. He punched the code into the alarm system to arm it, away mode. He opened the heavy front door. The cold night air rushed in, swirling through the empty hallway. Jack stepped out onto the stoop and pulled the door shut. The latch engaged with a solid, heavy thunk. He didn't look back at the windows. He didn't check to see if the neighbors were watching. He walked down the granite steps to his truck. He threw his toolbox into the bed of the pickup. He climbed into the cab and started the engine. The heat blasted from the vents, warming his frozen hands. He put the truck in gear, but before he pulled away, he opened his phone. He went to the Home app that controlled the smart thermostat in the brownstone. Current temp, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Jack scrolled the wheel down. 55 degrees Fahrenheit. 50 degrees Fahrenheit. 45 degrees Fahrenheit. He set it to 40 degrees, just enough to keep the pipes from bursting, but cold enough to make the air inside bite. He dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. He turned up the radio, classic rock, loud, and merged onto the street. He wasn't going back to the storage unit. He wasn't going to a hotel. He headed north, toward the Tobin Bridge, toward Maine, toward the cabin where the wood stove was real, where the snow was clean, and where the only work he had to do was for himself. He left the house behind him, a cold, empty box waiting for its owner to return. The Sunday evening traffic coming back from the Hamptons had been brutal, but Elena didn't mind. She was floating on a cloud of endorphins and expensive champagne. The weekend with Christian had been everything she needed, validating, passionate, and delightfully detached from reality. They hadn't spoken about mortgages or leaky windows once. They had talked about art, the future of tech, and how misunderstood they both were. As her Uber navigated the familiar streets of Beacon Hill, Elena checked her reflection in her compact mirror. She looked 5 years younger. The stress lines around her eyes had softened. She felt ready to handle Jack. She had rehearsed her speech. She would be gracious but firm, thanking him for the space, while maintaining her emotional distance. The car pulled up to the brownstone at 7 p.m. The house was dark. Not just the cozy, dim lighting she preferred, but an absolute, abyssal blackness behind the windows. "Looks like nobody's home," the driver remarked as he retrieved her suitcase. "My husband is probably asleep," Elena said, suppressing an eye roll. "He sleeps early." She rolled her suitcase to the front door, shivering slightly. The wind was picking up. She punched her code into the smart lock. It beeped cheerfully, and the deadbolt slid back. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Jack," she called out, dropping her keys in the brass bowl on the console table. Except, there was no console table. Her keys fell straight to the floor, hitting the hardwood with a loud, jarring clatter that echoed violently in the small foyer. Elena froze. She looked down at her keys lying on the bare oak planks. She looked up. The antique mirror that usually hung in the hallway was gone. The runner rug was gone. A blast of frigid air hit her face. It was freezing inside. She could see the faint plume of her own breath in the dim light coming from the street lamps outside. "Jack," she screamed, panic rising in her throat. "Jack, did we get robbed?" She fumbled for the light switch. The foyer chandelier flooded the space with light. It wasn't a robbery. Robbers left debris. They left overturned drawers and muddy footprints. This was clean. Elena walked into the living room, her heels clicking loudly on the wood. Clack, 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 a sound that usually died in the plush wool of her Persian rugs. The living room was empty. The Italian leather sofa? Gone. The coffee table? Gone. The TV, the sound system, the art on the walls? Gone. The room was just a white box with a fireplace at one end. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The cold was seeping through her coat. She hugged herself, spinning around. She ran to the kitchen. The marble island stood like a monolith in a deserted wasteland. The counter stools were gone. She yanked open the refrigerator. It was empty, wiped clean, the light inside illuminating absolutely nothing. "Jack," she screamed again, running toward the stairs. "This isn't funny. Where are you?" Silence answered her. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the whistling of the wind outside. She scrambled up the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tripped on the top step, catching herself on the banister. "Jack!" She burst into the master bedroom. She stopped dead. The room was stripped. The curtains were gone, leaving the tall windows staring like black eyes. The nightstands, the dresser, the vanity, all gone. In the center of the room sat the bed frame. Just the wooden skeleton. No mattress. No pillows. No sheets to hide under. Elena walked slowly toward the center of the room. Her legs felt weak. The cold was biting now, numbing her fingers. She saw the white rectangle on the floor. She dropped to her knees. The hardwood dug into her skin. She picked up the envelope. Her name wasn't on it. Just 3 words written in Jack's blocky, all-caps handwriting, the handwriting of a draftsman. "You wanted space." Her hands shook as she tore it open. A single brass key fell out. It clattered onto the floor, spinning before coming to a rest. It was a small key, the kind used for a padlock. There was no letter, no explanation, no angry manifesto. Elena looked around the empty room. She looked at the closet doors, which were slightly ajar. She crawled over to them and yanked them open. Empty. Her Chanel bags. Her Louboutins. Her vintage coats. Everything she had spent 10 years collecting. Everything that defined who she was. Gone. She stood up, spinning in a circle, clutching the key. The echo of her own breathing was the only sound in the house. "Jack?" she whimpered, the sound small and pathetic in the freezing room. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then a click. "This is Jack," his voicemail voice said, calm and steady. "I'm busy on a job site or out of range. Leave a message." Beep. Elena lowered the phone. She looked at the bed frame. She looked at the key. She wasn't homeless. She was in her own house. But for the first time in her life, she understood the difference between a house and a home. Jack hadn't just moved out. He had taken the home with him. She sank down onto the bare slats of the bed frame, pulling her coat tight around her, and for the first time that weekend, the champagne tasted like vinegar in her throat. 300 miles north, the fire in the cast-iron wood stove cracked sharply, sending a shower of sparks against the glass door. The heat in the small log cabin was thick and comforting, smelling of pine resin and wood smoke. Jack sat in the worn leather armchair, a piece of furniture he had bought before he ever met Elena, a piece she had banned from the brownstone because it was too rustic. He held a tumbler of bourbon in one hand and a book in the other. Outside, the Maine woods were silent, blanketed in 3 feet of fresh snow. His phone buzzed on the side table. It buzzed again, and again. He let it ring for a long moment, watching the name Elena flash across the screen. He wasn't afraid to answer it anymore. The anxiety that usually tightened his chest when she called, the fear of disappointment, of criticism, was gone. He picked up the phone and swiped green. "Hello, Elena," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and steady. "You are insane." Her voice came through the speaker shrill and breaking, echoing against the hard surfaces of the empty house in Boston. "Jack, where are my things? Where's the furniture? It's freezing in here. The thermostat says 40 degrees. Jack took a sip of the bourbon. It was warm going down. "The furnace is working fine. I just turned it down to save fuel. You can turn it up. It's a smart home, remember?" "I don't care about the thermostat," she screamed. "I care about my life. My clothes. My jewelry. Where's everything?" "It's safe," Jack said, watching the flames dance in the stove. "It's in a storage unit in South Boston. Harbor Point facility. The key I left you opens the lock. Unit B4. Storage." She sounded breathless, like she had been punched in the gut. "You put my La Perla lingerie in a storage unit? You put my antique vanity in a metal box?" "I moved your things," Jack corrected her gently. "Just like you asked. I told you to move your things to the couch," she shrieked. "I didn't tell you to empty the house." "No," Jack said. "You said you couldn't stand the heat coming off me. You said I was suffocating you. You said you wanted space." He paused, letting the silence travel down the line. "Look around, Elena. You have 4,000 square feet of empty space. Nothing to suffocate you. No sawdust. No work boots. No cheap furniture. Just the house. It's all yours." "Jack, stop this." Her voice wavered, shifting from anger to desperation. "This is a sick power play. I need you to bring the truck back. Tonight. I have a board meeting tomorrow. I have nothing to wear." "I can't do that," Jack said. "Why not?" "Because I'm in Maine." "Maine?" She choked on the word. "You left me?" "I didn't leave you, Elena. You left me a long time ago. I just finally packed up the rest of the baggage." But what am I supposed to do?" She sounded like a child now. The manager voice was gone. She was standing in a cold, dark room, realizing she didn't know how to fix a drafty window, or turn on a boiler, or make a house feel like a home. "You're resourceful," Jack said. "You figure it out. Or call Christian. Maybe he can help you move the furniture back. Although, I doubt he likes heavy lifting." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You know, I fixed the dimmer switch, Elena," Jack said, his voice hardening slightly. "And I fixed the window. And I found the phone in your gym bag. I saw the texts." Sandpaper hands, right? Silence. Absolute, dead silence on the line. My hands built that life for you, Jack said, looking at his own palm in the firelight. And my hands took it apart. It's fair. Jack, please, she whispered. It was the first time she had said please to him in years without following it with a demand. I'm cold. There's a hotel down the street, Jack said. The Liberty. It's nice. Plenty of heat. Are you coming back? She asked. Jack looked around the cabin. He looked at the rough-hewn logs of the walls. He looked at the snow piling up against the window. He felt the warmth of the fire on his face. He felt peace. No, Jack said. I don't think I am. But the house. The mortgage. We'll sell it, Jack said. Or you can buy me out. I don't care. It's just wood and brick, Elena. It's not a home anymore. He pulled the phone away from his ear. Jack, he tapped the red button. The call ended. He put the phone face down on the table. He didn't block her number. He didn't need to. He just picked up his book, leaned back in the leather chair, and listened to the fire crackle. In Boston, 300 miles away, Elena stood in the center of the empty bedroom, clutching a cold brass key, listening to the dial tone fade into the whistling wind of the drafty window she had asked him to fix. Spring arrived in Boston 3 months late, or at least it felt that way to Elena. The gray slush had finally melted, revealing the cracked pavement of the storage facility parking lot. Elena stood in front of Unit B4. The wind off the harbor was still cold, whipping her hair across her face. She wasn't wearing the cashmere trench coat anymore. She had sold it on a consignment app 2 weeks ago to pay the retainer for her divorce lawyer. She punched the code into the padlock, the same heavy brass lock Jack had snapped shut that night. It clicked open. She slid the bolt and heaved the rolling door up. It was heavier than she remembered. The smell of stale cardboard and cold dust hit her. There it was. Her life. The velvet armchair. The boxes of shoes. The dining table. It was all there, but it had nowhere to go. The brownstone on Mount Vernon Street had sold fast. The market was hot, and the historic renovation Jack had done was a major selling point. But the proceeds were held in escrow pending the final divorce decree, and without Jack's income bolstering the joint accounts, Elena had failed the credit check for the luxury apartment she wanted in the seaport. And Christian? Elena let out a short, bitter laugh that echoed in the metal container. Christian had lasted exactly 3 weeks after the night of the empty house. The moment the drama became real, the moment Elena wasn't a fun, secret getaway but a woman with legal battles, housing issues, and emotional baggage, he had pulled away. He was a venture capitalist, after all. He knew when an asset was distressed. He had pivoted to a 24-year-old art consultant who didn't come with a storage unit full of problems. Elena walked into the unit. She needed to find her spring coats. She started shifting boxes, breaking a nail on a piece of packing tape. She cursed, sinking down onto the edge of the mattress that was still wrapped in plastic. She looked at the mountain of luxury goods surrounding her. In the dim light, they looked like junk. Without the house Jack had built to display them, without the lighting he had installed, without the stability he had provided, these things were just stuff. Heavy, expensive burdens. She realized then that Jack hadn't just been the builder. He had been the foundation. She had treated him like the help, thinking she was the structure. She was wrong. She was just the decoration. And decoration, without a wall to hang on, just falls to the floor. _ 300 miles north. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh cedar. Jack stood on the deck of the cabin, looking out at the thawing lake. The ice was breaking up, shifting and groaning as the water beneath began to move again. He took a sip of coffee. His hands were wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. They were still rough. They were still stained with wood stain. But they weren't shaking. A truck pulled up the gravel driveway. It was the notary public from town. Jack walked down the steps to meet her. She handed him a thick envelope. "These are the final papers from Boston, Mr. Callahan," she said. "Just need your signature on the last page, and the sale of the property is official. The funds will be wired to your new account." Jack took the clipboard. He didn't flip through the pages. He knew what they said. He trusted the lawyer he had hired with the money he pulled from the joint account that day. He signed his name. Jack Callahan. The pen scratched smoothly against the paper. All set, he said, handing it back. You building something new? The notary asked, gesturing to the stack of fresh lumber tarped over near the barn. Yeah, Jack said, looking at the wood. I'm thinking of adding a workshop. I've got some ideas for custom furniture. Real wood. No veneers. Sounds sturdy. It will be, Jack said. The notary drove away, her tires crunching on the gravel. Jack stood alone in the quiet morning. He thought about the brownstone. He thought about the herringbone floors he had laid on his knees. He thought about the bed frame. He hoped the new owners would appreciate the joinery, even if they didn't know the story behind it. He took a deep breath of the crisp spring air. It didn't smell of expensive perfume or stale city rain. It smelled of pine and mud and possibility. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the railing, and walked toward the woodpile. He picked up a piece of cedar, feeling the weight of it, the grain of it. He had spent 10 years building a life for someone who wanted a stage. Now, he was going to build a life for himself. Jack pulled his pencil from behind his ear and made a mark on the wood. It was time to get to work.